The views expressed on Skeptically Speaking are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
Bring it on! The skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. 'Cause we're skeptically speaking.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Shell. As amateur science enthusiasts, we try to stay on top of current research, cutting-edge technology, and new discoveries of all kinds. But being a science junkie has changed a bit throughout the years. From the rise of the blogger to what appears to be the death throes of print media, how exactly has science journalism changed? And is it for the better? Our guest today is Bora Zivkovic, blog and community editor at Scientific American, and we'll be discussing how online science reporting and the explosion of science blogging are affecting the way that science news is brought to the public. Speaking of news, for those of you in Western Canada, the Centre for Inquiry Calgary and the Greater Edmonton Skeptic Society are pleased to announce 3 appearances by past Skeptically Speaking guest and scientific paranormal investigator, Benjamin Radford. You may remember that Radford is one of only a few investigators in the world who approaches paranormal claims from a skeptical, scientific perspective. On Thursday, October 21st in Calgary, and on Friday the 22nd in Edmonton, he'll present Reflections on a Decade of Paranormal Investigation. Drawing from dozens of case studies over a decade of personal investigations, he'll discuss the nature of unexplained mysteries such as ghosts, crop circles, Sasquatch, and psychic powers. On Saturday, October 23rd, Radford returns to Calgary for The Real X-Files, a scientific paranormal investigations workshop. In the movies and on television, investigating a haunted house looks pretty easy. So how do real-life paranormal investigators go about separating truth from myth? If you're interested in what science says about the evidence for these topics, or how you too can become an evidence-based paranormal investigator, visit edmontonskeptics.com for more information. And now, on to Speaking Up. I'm here with Stephen Strauss. Stephen wrote award-winning articles, columns, and editorials about science and technology for the Globe and Mail for about 25 years. Welcome to Skeptically Speaking, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
So when did science journalism become sort of a distinct topic in mainstream reporting?
My familiarity with it at the Globe would be that it started about 1970 or so there. There were probably other places which started earlier than that in the States, but I think it's fair to say that it was probably something like the race to the moon and all of that that gave it a kind of a currency and a kind of profile that it didn't have before.
So maybe give us a state of the union of the newspaper industry now. Give us some background.
Again, I will speak for this country. There was, in terms of newspaper science reporting, you might say, a sort of a golden age in which there were numbers of places that had numbers of science reporters. There was also a fair amount of travel that you could do. So I saw various launches going to the space station, and I spent some time in Europe, and I wandered around Japan a bit and went over across the United States and Canada a fair bit. There's significantly less of that, in part having to do, I think, with the rise of the ease of the flow of information, and in part it may have something to do with the diminution of the importance of the space program, in which being there actually had a real effect. My sense is that there's a kind of a lull in lots of areas in science now, that there was a great excitement about what was going to happen in genetics in the late 80s, early 90s, and I think it's fair to say that much of that excitement hasn't been borne out. There's now considerable excitement about using imaging technology for looking at things like the brain. What's interesting about that in terms of, let's say, newspaper reporting is that you really want to see it not just as an image, you'd actually like to see the whole process. It actually is the kind of thing which is best shown on the internet, doing a minute or two of here's what it looks like.
Right.
There are other things. The relationship between information and between the expression of the information, which I think there's been a profound change. What used to happen is that you'd have this huge production of information by the scientific community in all of its manifestations. There's something like every year 100,000 peer-reviewed papers produced by Canadian scientists alone, and there's something like 2.5 million produced by scientists around the world. So in the past, what would happen is that in order to get into a newspaper, it had to be very, very, very interesting because there was so much produced and so little actually got into the newspaper. So it was actually easy to be a science reporter because you could actually just go off to a library and look and see what had been published in the last few months that hadn't been spoken about elsewhere and come back with, 8 or 10 interesting things that you could possibly write about. The newspaper, in my view, its essential job in terms of science reporting, or its unannounced job in terms of science reporting, was to limit the amount of information that got out to people. I mean, it didn't officially say we are preventing you from hearing about all this other stuff, but in fact, that's what happened. And it happened because what a newspaper was is itself a limited vehicle in which to express and contain information. So it has a limited size every day, and there's just a limited amount of space. What that meant in practice is that all of the reporters were in profound competition with one another. One thinks about newspapers being in competition with other newspapers. In fact, the view from inside the newspaper is that you were always in competition with other people coming up with other stuff. And one of the reality is that you could have come up with the absolute best story of all times, and if some big news event had taken place, forget about it. It was obliterated by things happening elsewhere based on the fact simply that it's a limited amount of space. One of the things that science reporting, demanded is that you have a significant amount of explanation because, in fact, people weren't going to be able to easily get the information that had to explain why this was important elsewhere. Well,
then at that point, would the focus be on entertainment or providing information?
Never underestimate the value of entertainment. There's a whole theory of science journalism that was oriented. First, largest, smallest, oldest. So you'd start out with this is the oldest dinosaur ever discovered, or the first of this kind of species of animal found. You'd be oriented because, in fact, you're having to come up with something that said, look, you really should pay attention to this now, when, in fact, there's so much stuff that you could write about. Things like going to shuttle launches because, look, it's going up and this is the first Canadian going on a shuttle launch or something. There were, for a period of time, I'll speak again about the Globe, there was a science section in the 80s where every Saturday you'd have a couple of pages devoted to science. That actually was good in the sense that actually there was space for you. So it was actually bad in the sense that you felt like you were in the little science ghetto. You ended up with this sort of funny thing where you were saying to people, look, if you're not interested in science, we've made it easy for you. You can just turn these 2 pages.
Right.
What you were looking at in ways I think you were not really conscious of is having to actually put a lot of information into stories because you couldn't easily refer people elsewhere. What it did is it had a profoundly distorting effect in ways that people didn't realize on what you reported and how you reported it.
Now we're at a point, though, where there aren't even science departments in newspapers anymore.
I guess what I would argue that's, you don't have science sections for lots of papers. You don't have science reporters, and that's all true. Having said that, the kinds of changes that have taken place in where it is that you can get your information from, so that now getting information off the internet, what you've got is you have the rise of the science blogger, but you also have the ability to look at, so if it's not being covered in your local area by your local newspaper, you can go Google News, where you can do a Google search term and you're interested in, like, I want all the stories that appear about such and such. There are also, all kinds of daily news aggregators of specific topics. So if you want to know about space, well, there's Space Daily. You also end up with this other interesting thing, is that the producers of the scientific information, universities and granting councils, have in ways that they really couldn't be before. They become publishers. The press releases are actually, I think that the releasers are understanding that they're not just in the here's putting something out that a newspaper reporter will go and make sense of, but in fact they're publishing it. So that people can simply go to those releases and say, okay, so here's what's happened in this area by these people. There hasn't been separate reporting, and you talk to other people and get different points of view, but there's a ton of information, and it's available instantaneously.
I have a couple of questions about that, actually. One is that I have noticed that when a science story does make it into the newspaper, it does seem to be pulled almost word for word from the press release. So is that typical at this point?
Actually, I think what I would suggest is that probably happened a lot in the past. Only you couldn't see it. You didn't have access to the release. I mean, what happens now is you can view the release yourself. I think there is, with the decline of the specialized science reporters, there probably is a tendency to have more of that in general. I think, however, that if you look and you are looking at the totality of things, saying, look, the newspaper has become simply one of the vehicles by which this kind of news is going out, that you're just massively impressed with the variety of, let's say, science magazines, for example, that have now bloggers who are every day, looking at 2 or 3 stories and saying, interesting stuff about that. You've got individual scientists who are actually also reporting on various stories. What's interesting in that regard is that the reality of being a newspaper reporter is that you were, at the best, a gifted amateur. I mean, you covered such a wide variety of topics that you weren't really an expert in anything. People would have fields that they were more interested in, they would become more expert in. But you always felt when you talked to people that it was the amateur talking to the expert, and there was always, you could have reported on a topic a fair bit and you'd understand really better than the man on the street, but there's all kinds of things you didn't understand, both the subtleties and the larger implications as well. I mean, what you have now is that you have a real competition for newspapers on the part of things like the scientific bloggers that go in and actually, dare I say, really know what they're talking about.
Right.
They may not be very good writers. They may not actually know how to make an argument effectively. But you suddenly have daily, in ways that just didn't before, just a whole slew of people and a whole bunch of information. And if you want background information on something, when I write things these days, I try and include a lot of hyperlinks in what I do, because I actually want people to be able to understand why it is that I'm saying something. Suddenly, you're not worried about all the background information they're not going to be able to get. There's just a ton of it that they can get to. So
we still live at a point in our society where still not everybody uses the internet. So my concern is that the people who still are getting their main source of news from a newspaper, what kind of science reporting are they receiving? Because not everybody, even if they do use the internet, not everybody is as interested in science as some of us, and they potentially won't go and do that extra research.
If one is arguing, look, there's not as much expert science coverage in the newspapers because you don't have as many expert science reporters because newspapers have cut back on this, I would say, yes, that's probably right. I mean, I see science reporting and I often flinch because what I've understood, the reporter hasn't asked a couple of basic questions. You're looking at something and it's not simply that it's one-sided, but it's ignorant of the topic. Having said that, it seems to me that to say, look, what about those people who aren't using the internet or aren't getting the information in this, that, and the other way? I think I have to say, with no malice in my heart, that first of all, they're becoming fewer and fewer, it seems to me, and second of all, that if they say, look, the information isn't very good that we're getting or not as good as in the past because you have this thing which is providing lots more and lots better information, you have to say to them, look, well, I'm sorry that it might have been better in the past. It actually is, in general, almost enormously better. And if you're not taking advantage of the ways that it makes that information better, even if you're not going online to read the article, even if you say, look, I want my daily newspaper and whatever, what you're not getting if you don't do that is you're not getting the comments that appear in relationship to the stories. What used to happen in the newspaper world is that you would do this thing where you'd work on this piece and you'd say, gee, that was really interesting, and you'd write it up and you'd go on. And you'd hear absolutely nothing from the audience unless you screwed something up. And you'd get like all these snarky letters. Well, you've made this mistake, and whatever and whatever. You wouldn't get any kind of sense of what do people think of this. But even more to the point, I think even more fundamentally, what other questions do they have? I mean, you do this and you say, well, I think I've answered all the questions. And it can turn out, and if you look at what happens, if you go to the online newspaper sites and you watch the responses of the readers, often you go through and they raise actually questions. You go like, geez, that's, as a reporter, I should have answered that. I mean, when I do this, I write a column for the CBC's website. I pay attention to the comments. I look at them because, in fact, if I revisit that topic, I want to actually have seen what it is that the readers say that they wanted to know. You end up with this kind of conversation now that just didn't exist in newspapers. It was always one-sided. It was always the reporter say to people, look, we think these are the things you should be interested in, and these are the lengths that you go, and that's what we're going to do, and if you don't like it, well, too bad. What happens now is that you have real conversations, and the conversation, I guess I would argue from a journalist perspective, it's really good for a journalist to hear what people think about what she has written and what they haven't written. It's really good because, in fact, it should be a self-corrective process. You sort of say, well, gee, I didn't explain that well. I should have talked about that. That's an interesting question I actually hadn't thought of. Well, that's what you get with the kind of journalism. What you couldn't get in newspapers because the media limited the kinds of things you do. You couldn't have this kind of thing in a print publication because you just couldn't put in everything, and you couldn't get it back quickly enough. And, if you got things in the mail and, blah, 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 blah. We have that now. And what that means is if you're really interested and if you want things to be better and if you have questions and whatever, suddenly there are venues to be doing that. My view, I actually think it's better now. At least there's the possibility of better now. There's the possibility of knowing stuff. The commenters, refer people, say, well, you should take a look at this piece that contradicts, so you actually can take a look. The people who don't participate in this, let's say the readers of print newspapers, I look at them and I say, well, okay, it's your decision and I understand why you're doing it, but you understand in that you do that, you are accepting a product that I think is fundamentally not as good as the one you can get if you allow this kind of integration of journalism, newspapering, magazine, and the internet.
Thanks very much for being here, Stephen. And we'll be right back with more Skeptically Speaking after this.
Skeptically Speaking wants you to question everything. You can email your questions for next week's episode to live@skepticallyspeaking.com, or if you're on Twitter, we're at Skeptical Radio, or use our handy question submission box on the website at skepticallyspeaking.com. You can also subscribe to the show in iTunes or listen to past episodes, and while you're there, why not add your review? Skeptically Speaking is rebroadcast on a number of fine radio stations. Check the media page at skepticallyspeaking.com to see if we air near you. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell. I'm here with Bora Zivkovic, who writes a blog around the clock, which covers chronobiology, science, media, and education, and has the best collection of science links anywhere. He's appeared on the show before to talk about ScienceOnline, the brilliant annual open source science conference in North Carolina. He's the former online community manager at the Public Library of Science and has recently become the blogging community editor at Scientific American. Welcome back to the show, Bora.
Wonderful to be here again.
So tell us about your new position at Scientific American. You're their blog and community editor. So what does that mean?
It's starting really next week. I'm going to New York City to the offices, and we are going to conceptualize and then build and launch a network of science blogs under the banner of Scientific American.
So how did this whole science blogging thing start?
This science blogging thing, well, there have been a couple of science bloggers as early as 10 years ago, mostly coming out of the tech blogging kind of pioneering days. But there was the really science blogging took off about 5 or 6 years ago, mostly people coming out of the political blogosphere, mostly on the liberal side, where people were with scientific backgrounds started writing about topics that had to do mostly with creationism, pseudoscience. In essence, skeptical bloggers started first, and some of them, or many of them, had scientific backgrounds, so they moved into writing about science and inspired others who then came in and started doing straightforward science blogging. A big impetus for science blogging was the formation of the scienceblogs.com network by Seed Media back in January 2006. I joined that network in June of that year. What is important about it is that it placed a number of bloggers who, at the time were, majority of science bloggers in the world were on there, but right now it's a tiny sliver because it's exploded. What it did is it made it very visible to the mainstream media, narrowed that gap between what is happening in the science blogosphere and what the mainstream media journalists are seeing and reading. There was this one-stop shopping place for science journalists to see what the crowd is talking about, especially because bloggers on scienceblogs.com were indexed on Google News, which essentially makes them the media. So that is really what started the whole explosion in the number of science blogs, and also the rise in quality. I was on scienceblogs.com, and I know how much we read and checked each other, how much my blogging improved because I knew I was so visible by other bloggers who are going to check my facts,
right.
And also by readers who are, in large numbers there. So I became a much better blogger in the sense that I was checking my own facts better. That like everything that takes, practice makes perfect. Getting better at writing, having good role models about how to write a good blog post, and so we all improved from that, and we all benefited from that. Then the whole thing exploded about 2 months ago. I'm assuming you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. But actually, let's sort of give the audience a bit more background here. So why do you think that scientists took to blogging so easily?
That's a good question. Did scientists take to blogging so easily? After all, techie bloggers, mommy bloggers, the diarists, and political bloggers, they took off much earlier. You can actually argue that scientists took a while. And when you look at the composition of the science blogosphere, there are, a few people quite prominent in science blogospheres who are, let's say, higher up in the academic hierarchy. Most of the science bloggers are younger. They are graduate students, young faculty, undergraduate students, and a lot of people who have actually gone out of the pipeline. They are not now actively doing science. They used to, like myself, and pursuing other things, either teaching or getting into new journalism or other things, but have retained their expertise in science, have retained the interest, love to write. So why not run a blog?
Well, I was wondering, do you think it might also have something to do with the fact that they were having trouble getting published in other media?
You mean like in newspapers and magazines?
Mm-hmm. Or science journals?
Science journals, well, if the work was good, they published. Also, a completely different way of writing and a different audience. When you write a scientific paper that you're going to publish in a journal, your audience are people in your field. When you're writing on a blog, your audience is potentially everybody in the world with as much as or as little background in your field or in science in general as can be. And different bloggers write at different writing levels. Some write at pretty high levels, right. So it could be understood by people, let's say, in their field and related fields. But, if it's a physics blog, maybe biologists cannot really understand it. Others are really good at pitching it to lay audiences or even kids. Those are some of the most popular blogs because they can garner a large audience because they're very understandable.
And we actually have a question already from the website.
One disturbing trend I've seen develop over the past decade or so is the problem of reporters who have no science background covering scientific stories. News editors seem to think that one journalist is as good as the next. That may be true in some areas, sports or entertainment, for example, but often when I read a science story, it's soon clear that the reporter lacks a real understanding of the subject. Do you see that problem as well? And if so, is it made worse by well-meaning but poorly informed citizen science bloggers? And that's from Ben Radford.
It's a great question, but what is very, very interesting that you hear exactly the same sentiment from people whose expertise is elsewhere. For instance, economics or politics or sports or cooking. Suddenly, they realize that reporting in their newspaper about their topic of expertise is really, really shoddy. And so they may have been okay with it 20 years ago, but now when they can find better coverage online, or when they can find good critiques of what that article in their newspaper wrote yesterday and see dissected exactly where it went wrong, people are kind of wising up to it. So science is just one of many, many areas, or probably all the areas that mainstream media does poorly. Now, there are two kinds of journalists who cover science for the mainstream media. Those are expert science writers, science journalists, and there are, beat journalists, reporters in the newsroom who can be told to write about everything and anything and probably have to do 7 stories a day. There is a big difference in how those two classes of journalists cover science, because the specialized science writers, science journalists, have, even if they don't have PhDs in science, they have spent some years covering the same topic. And they're often even narrower than just science. Somebody who, like Carl Zimmer, covers evolution and biology is not going to be asked to cover astronomy. So they can even specialize within science journalism for a particular area of science, and they over time can become really, really good at it, almost as good as if they had a PhD. So they do really, really good reporting, but the beat reporters who are doing 7 stories a day, they don't even have time, even if they can, even if they have the ability and background, they don't have time to produce a good article. So that's why they fall back on, copying and pasting press releases and things like that. Unfortunately, newspapers have cut their science pages, and so most of what is happening in the mainstream media as far as science coverage is done by beat reporters who are doing seven stories a day. Unless there's a really, really big story, in which case the newspaper will call somebody like Carl Zimmer and ask, hey, can we get a story about this? And then usually that kind of article is also given more space. And science does require a little bit more space than what is it usually given as far as inches in newspaper to give a story everything that the story needs to explain the findings, for instance, to the readers.
And actually, on that note, we have another question from the website.
As we move from print to online media, is there any dilution of the science, less strict content, and perhaps a lighter look at it, or should there be to reach a greater audience?
I think it's going both ways. There is, when you have a newspaper or radio programs like Science Friday, for instance, or television programs, they are traditionally geared for a particular reading level, or 6th grade or 3rd grade or whatever depends. So there's this kind of narrow band of reading level that mainstream media caters to all the time and doesn't go out of that either lower or higher. And I think what the internet is doing is that allowing people who have talent to cover stories at different levels. Some are really good at explaining it to kids or their grandmothers or other people who have absolutely zero interest in science, let alone background. And then there are the others who are capable of providing a little bit more than what the mainstream media provides, giving a little bit more detail, a little bit more explanation, treating their audience as a little bit more intelligent and a little bit more educated, and fostering interesting online discussions where other experts may chime in the comments and provide even additional information, additional insight. So I think it's internet expanding the kinds of audiences who would be interested in science reporting.
Speaking of expansion, one of the things that Stephen mentioned in the Speaking Up is sort of expanding the writer's toolkit and video and audio and how they're used to convey information that print really couldn't. So how is that changing the way that science stories are reported?
Absolutely. Images, audio like podcasts, videos, more and more things like visualizations or even games, simple games where you can, let's say, change a parameter and see how it changes the outcome. Those are kinds of things that are suitable for the web. Those are things that people like, that they're fun. And then usually there is text attached to that for anybody who wants to know more. And then if you want to know even more, there are always links to other resources. If it is a study, there should be a link to the scientific paper itself. There's good news today. BBC has just sent a note to all of their reporters that if they are reporting on science, they have to provide a link to the paper, which is absolutely fantastic because it enhances the trust into the journalist. Like, you can check me by reading the paper, and it allows people who want to learn more to go and learn more by reading the paper itself. Now, many papers are behind paywalls, but some of the people in the audience will be able to read it because they are inside the academia and they have access. They'll read it, and they can put in the comments what they learned from reading the paper, so the other commenters and readers can see and get kind of a second opinion, which can bolster the reputation of the journalist if that the job was well done. I'm in this field, I read a paper, and this article reports it correctly. So that's a good thing. And if not, then you get corrected, and if you're a good journalist, you'll learn from your mistakes and not make them next time.
And we have another question from the website.
I get most of my science news from blogs and podcasts, but there's an increasing number of science videos online. Do you think that we'll ever stop reading altogether? Will all of science journalism eventually be on YouTube?
No, of course. I think that things like videos and images are a fantastic draw, and that captures you to the story. And sometimes watching that 1 minute, 2 minute video is enough for you. Okay, I got this happened, or I learned something new, I move on. But sometimes it's a hook, and there should be links or text that add more information.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking, and we're on the line with Bora Zivkovic, blog and community editor at Scientific American. If you have a question about the future of science journalism, email us at live@skepticallyspeaking.com or tweet us at Skeptical Radio. And we'll be right back after this.
On the next episode of Skeptically Speaking, we look at the science of gender with academic psychologist and writer Dr. Cordelia Fine. In her new book, Delusions of Gender, she challenges the assumption that gender roles are wired into our brains and shows us how ubiquitous cultural stereotypes are mistaken for actual fact. And on Everything You Know Is Sort of Wrong, Greg Layden asks if modern hobbies are an evolutionary consequence of prehistoric gender roles. That's next week on Skeptically Speaking, Friday night at 6 Mountain Time, live at skepticallyspeaking.com.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell, and I'm here with Bora Zivkovic. So, Bora, in more general-purpose media, science is struggling to basically stay a part of the reporting at all. So, are publications that specifically report on science feeling that same fight to stay alive, to, I guess, capture the attention of the audience? Specifically science magazines.
I think so. There's the difference between general media and any kind of specialized or niche media is the difference between what is often called push versus pull strategy. The pull strategy is the one that is pulling in the audience that's already interested. So people who are interested in science, they're going to subscribe to Science Magazine. They're going to go right to the science section of the newspaper. They're going to watch science-related shows on television and listen to Science Friday or other science shows on radio. They're going to seek science information on the web, including on blogs. Most of the population is not interested in science or not aware they're interested in science. They're going to, just watch TV because it's on, or listen to the radio because they're on a long commute, or grab the newspaper out of habit, and they may skip over science or not skip over science. The good push strategy would be to have science intermingled with everything else. So you have news about politics and about celebrities and about movies, and there's cool news about science, and it's kind of part of the news flow that anybody and everybody gets, and then they would maybe understand, hey, I didn't even know that this is interesting. The science is interesting. Let me look again. Let me look some more. So in this kind of environment where people have so many choices what to do, having a niche publication is really, really difficult. It's difficult financially to sustain such a publication, and one needs to expand instead of just having your magazine on the newspaper rack, to expand online and other places, to hook up with radio and TV shows if you can, but definitely have a big web presence on social media, have your own website, have your own bloggers, to try to reach to broader audiences, and especially to use social media as sort of a push. I have a lot of friends on Facebook and followers on Twitter. Many of them are not scientists or science bloggers or science journalists. Many of them are friends and family, people I've known from high school. They're not in science, but they see what's happening on my Facebook wall, for instance, or on my Twitter stream, and they'll click on a link and read an interesting science story, and they'll find it interesting. So that's one way that, for instance, social media now are pushing science information to people who would not actively seek it.
So then what's the difference between a blog that's written specifically for a science magazine website and one that's written by a lone, unaffiliated blogger?
The difference is really in visibility. A blog that is on a network that's affiliated with a media organization or a publisher is going to be right on top on Google search and Google News and Google blog search. So that's the kind of a network effect, because by virtue of being on the same site, having all these incoming and outgoing links there, Google algorithms will put you up. The second thing is visibility to the media. So your story can then be seen by mainstream media and hopefully picked up. So when this whole, the events of the summer happened, and instead of having just one network where all the media is checking in, now we have dozens of networks. With a couple of my friends, we put together an aggregator, one page where you can see aggregated all of the networks and a lot of independent blogs and individual blogs and news blogs all in one place, essentially for the media to be able to see, so they don't miss out on the story just because it's on an independent blog. We, the science bloggers, know each other. It doesn't matter if you're on WordPress or Blog Post or Blogspot or on a network. But for the outside world, that visibility is greatly enhanced by being on a network, by being on Google News, indexed there, and by being read by other journalists. So the real old media is watching you, and it goes two ways. Sometimes it is the bloggers who act as watchdogs of the media. So if the media reports on the story wrongly, bloggers will raise some noise. If you're an independent blogger, it may not be seen, but if a bunch of people on networks are doing that, then the media will see the journalists who wrote those stories will see it, and they'll learn from that, hopefully, and many have, and improve their coverage later on, which is good for everybody because the general coverage gently and slowly improves that way, because there's a whole category of people now, the scientists who are blogging, who are fact-checking and correcting what is happening in the mainstream media. That's hopefully improving it as a whole. So there's this whole big network effect that affects which narrows the distance between new media and old media. They see each other better.
Well, I'm wondering about solo bloggers. Do they have a harder time accessing materials? Because earlier you mentioned the paywalls. So how does not being able to access journal articles affect the quality of a blog?
Well, the science blogging community, we're pretty tight. So we're all, following each other on Twitter and friend feed and Facebook, and we're reading each other's blogs and subscribe to each other's feeds. So it's pretty easy to email another blogger and say, "Hey, do you have access to this paper?" I don't think that's a big problem as far as being an independent blogger. Just because you're independent doesn't mean that you're not part of the community. You're just less visible to a much broader audience and to the traditional media.
And we have a question from the website.
The big science news in Canada is that there are now strict controls on what federal researchers can reveal about their work. When traditional journalists are finding it difficult to secure interviews with scientists, can we assume that it's going to be practically impossible for science bloggers? Any advice?
I don't know exactly what the new rules are in Canada. Sorry about that. But if scientists are muzzled in any way about talking about that research, that is bad for everybody. It's bad for the scientists, it's bad for journalists, it's bad for bloggers, it's bad for the audience. Transparency is always a good strategy for most things in life.
Our sound guy, Ryan, he actually has some information on that.
What I believe the situation is that I believe it's Natural Resources Canada. Those scientists now have to have their media interviews basically approved, and they have to be told what they can and cannot say to the journalist. And often they essentially get muzzled because they cannot make the deadlines of their journalists by getting this approval.
That is one big bad idea. I'm going to look into that, probably blog about it, because it really curbs the free flow of information.
Since we're talking about that sharing of information, and you've mentioned it twice now, the Science Blogging Network's idea. First of all, explain those. What is a science blog network?
Science Blog Networks is a collection of bloggers who are all on the same platform, all on the same URL. There are many different kinds of science blogging networks. It can be a collection of like-minded friends who are all writing about science, and they decide to pool resources and to put all their blogs on one place. There have been several founded recently, and they're absolutely wonderful and marvelous. Others are networks that are run by an organization. It can be a scientific society, or more likely either a science publisher like Nature or PLOS, or a media organization. So there are science blogging networks hosted by The Guardian, by Wired, by Discover, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and there will be Scientific American as well. So those are the two main types of science blogging networks, either a blogger cooperatives, or the others are kind of media-owned, media-run. And there's not really one-to-one correspondence, but in general, collaboratives, chip in a little bit of money for the server, and nobody's paid. Whilst most, but not all, of those media-run or organizationally or company-run networks do pay their bloggers at least a little bit.
That sounds lovely, except for the not being paid part. But there are downsides. Can you explain some of the recent downsides we've seen?
You probably want me to talk about Pepsi.
I do so.
One thing that bloggers cherish, and that is freedom to say whatever they want. And this, for science bloggers especially, the most important thing is the independence, which allows one to gain a reputation. So science bloggers are never going to have, they don't have anything to sell to you. They're not going, there's nobody who can give a science blogger a product to tout. So science bloggers are really ferociously defending that independence. I'm a scientist, I'm only interested in the truth. And I'm not selling you anything. I'm not tied and bound by anybody. I don't report to anybody. Me and nature. And I don't mean the journal of Nature. I mean the outside world. It is, between us, and I'm trying to figure out how nature works and how the world works, and I'm going to tell you at my best knowledge what it is, and nobody's interfering. So when you have that kind of a mindset, it's a science mindset, but it's definitely a science blogger's mindset. When with that kind of mindset, you have an interference from outside, and that's then you have a recipe for disaster. And that's what happened. ScienceBlogs.com, a community of, at that time, about 90 bloggers, mostly independent bloggers, and there are a couple of blogs that were written by people working for a particular, science promoting organization or an institute, but they were kind of freelancers. They were hosted by an independent person. So it was not PR, and they were not paid. Nobody paid anybody. Those were free blogs. No side was paying to the other side. And then the Seed Media Group made a tactical mistake, and they received money from Pepsi to let Pepsi people completely, in completely uncontrolled manner, write a blog that looks exactly like every other blog on there, that looks just as independent as everybody else's blog there, but was written essentially by their PR people. Yes, those PR people have PhDs in science, but they are PR people for Pepsi. They were not going to write anything until they're, it's checked off and signed by their departments. So they were not going to talk about, bad things that Pepsi does. I'm sure Pepsi, like every other organization, is trying to do some nice things as well, but most of what Pepsi produces is a pretty junky food. This is what is in media, in journalism, called the breach of the ed wall. Ed for advertising and ed for editorial. So when you have an advertisement that looks just like something written by an editor or a correspondent. It was another problem is that bloggers were never told about that in advance. The blog just showed up on the network, and it was noticed. And interestingly, some of the first people who left immediately in a huff were people who have experience in science journalism, because they immediately recognized that this was a serious breach of the wall between editorial and advertorial. They kind of cleared it up for all of us, what it was. We definitely didn't like it, but couldn't really put a finger on it. Like, why is this so unpleasant for us, and why we really, really don't like this Pepsi blog being together with us. So they kind of defined that for us and explained to us why this is a very serious ethical breach. So a bunch of other bloggers, including myself, left within about 10 days of the Pepsi blog being installed there. And even when it was deleted, removed, all the apologies, a lot of us felt that the damage was done, that the brand was damaged by this event.
It was fascinating to watch.
I'm sure it was fascinating to watch, to have a good, objective view, and a lot of us were struggling with trying to step back and take an objective view and make the best decisions for ourselves and the best decisions for the network. I mean, we have invested a lot in the network. We like it. We still like it. We like all those people there who are still there, and we don't have any grudge, about the people who made a decision to stay and try to maybe reform it from within. All the best luck for them. But I felt that it took me 10 days of thinking that I had to leave, and what happened is that my leaving kind of precipitated this explosion. That it's kind of going that way, slowly, gradually. Several other people left, and everybody was a little nervous. And then that kind of a last straw, or the gunshot in Sarajevo, or whatever. Everything is set up, but it needed one key event, and I think my leaving was that key event that led to a sudden and fast complete restructuring of the science blogging ecosystem, where instead of one network which everybody is watching and a bunch of independents, suddenly a lot of other players decided, okay, it's not going to be just one network and a bunch of independents. It's going to be a bunch of equal networks. So Scientopia was up in 2 weeks. Several other collaborative networks came up, very quickly, or like Lab Spaces was a different kind of site. It was mostly a kind of a science news site, but it was easy for the person who runs it to add blogging capability to it and invite a bunch of interesting, good bloggers to blog there. So within, days or weeks, a bunch of these networks came up. The corporate networks, of course, had to take a little bit longer because they had to, look at the, financial side and the technical side and the organizational side. They couldn't just, jump in and make it. But even they were pretty fast. I mean, about 2 months for PLOS blogs and Wire blogs and the Guardian blogs until after the Pepsi-gate happened, those networks were already up and running. So, now we have a bunch of those, and the thing is, it's better that way, because instead of one network that is completely sucking up air and not giving really anybody any visibility, suddenly there's a bunch of networks who are reading each other, linking to each other. Everybody's now important.
Well, it did seem like suddenly there were so many more science blogs to read. But I guess it wasn't that. They're just all collected in one place now.
It just seems like there are more bloggers. I don't think there are many more blogs that were started recently. It's just all those blogs suddenly moved from invisibility to visibility, which is a good thing.
Well, I do have to ask, though, now, this is fine for all of us that are online. But there are a lot of us that aren't. And I spoke with Stephen about this in the Speaking Up. And there are still people who get their news solely from newspapers or TV. So if we're offering the good science reporting only online, doesn't that leave non-computer users kind of out of the loop? And I'm not talking about the people that would seek out science news. I'm speaking specifically of the people that aren't interested enough to actually search that out. And I guess what I'm really worried about is, how does that affect our society?
This is a very, very important question that you asked. Now, the percentage of people who get their news online is growing really, really fast. So if you compare the numbers today to numbers of 2 years ago, 5 years ago, it's really meteoric, but it's still not 100%. And what is worrisome is the digital divide. It's much easier to get online if you live in San Francisco or New York City than if you live somewhere in the middle of nowhere or in a developing country. So that is something that is definitely a worry, because it can potentially make the divide between haves and have-nots harsher, bigger. So people who are normally well informed are going to get even better informed, and people who are not are going to get even worse because their local newspaper is shutting down or kicking off all the science reporters off their out of their newsroom. So that's a big problem. Where I see it happening, first, more and more people are getting online, and second, it is very interesting that some of the biggest adopters of mobile use that we have to keep in mind when we're doing stuff online, to make sure that everything we do online is accessible and easy to find for people who don't have computers but they have cell phones that they can use to access the web, to get the news come to them even when they're not searching them very hard. So that's definitely something to watch and to work as well as possible. Another thing is that the traditional media that are still seen by some and who are not online, from newspapers to radio to television to books, should send their audiences to the web. And I really like what, for instance, National Public Radio is doing, and also the Public Radio International, NPR and PRI, is that pretty much, after every story, they say, go to our website to see more. Go to our website to see the video of this that we, try to convey in words, but it's hard to convey in words what only an image or a video can really tell you. So they're constantly reminding people, drawing people to their websites to say, there's more information there. If you're interested in this story, there's more.
Well, speaking of there being more, there is much more to talk about, but we are completely out of time. Thank you so much for being here, Bora.
Thank you, and I hope to see you in January.
Oh, I'll be there.
All right.
And January is Science Online, and you can find the link to that and to Scientific American and to the rest of Bora's blogging life on our website. And that's at skepticallyspeaking.com. And while you're there, do click the links to Twitter, to Facebook, to our past episodes, and to iTunes, where you can subscribe to the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Skeptically Speaking. Hello, all. You may have heard me mention that we're coming up on our lovely host station's annual fundraising campaign, Fund Drive, which runs from October 27th to November 6th. Skeptically Speaking will air twice during the campaign, and that gives me 2 opportunities to enthusiastically ask for your support for this fine radio station. One of those episodes will be a retrospective. We'll take a look back through our past episodes and revisit some of the most interesting, entertaining, and amusing segments that we've recorded with our guests. Any episode, any guest in our catalog is fair game, and you can help us choose. If you've ever wanted to play producer, now's your chance. We've received some brilliant emails about your favorite show moments, so do keep them coming. You can send your ideas to feedback@skepticallyspeaking.com. In addition to airing those best bits, we have so much more in store for you. We have fantastic prizes we'll be giving away on air, some of them donated by past guests to the show. We have a veritable multimedia extravaganza in the works, and we'll have many, many ways that you can show your love for science and critical thought by giving us money. We'll tell you all about what to expect on upcoming episodes. Until then, do keep in mind that on Skeptically Speaking, we interview researchers, authors, and experts to help you understand the evidence, arguments, and science behind what's in the news and on the shelves. You may not realize it, but some people are adamantly opposed to some of the subjects that we cover on the show. Topics like vaccination, genomics, nuclear power, and evolution. Even conversations about race and gender. This is all content that some people find very controversial. And that means that these subjects desperately need to be discussed rationally, realistically, and reasonably. And you can contribute to maintaining that dialogue by donating. In the meantime, thanks so much for your support. And stay tuned to Skeptically Speaking.
Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, break the spell of Pavlov's spells. Cause we're skeptically speaking, our mind reading tarot cards and witches, psychics, and their spoon-bending mind tricks. All the humbug, flim-flam, frauds and shams, the charlatan woo. I don't think you understand, it's the hocus pocus, out of focus locus, eroding the brain, making gains on the hopeless. Let the crystal ball fall, smash on the floor, leave the pieces alone, we don't need them anymore. Just a microscope, telescope, magnifier, reading in between the lines of these lies. Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. Cause we're skeptically speaking.